talk about debt a little bit, because I have some notes of that, and I would like to get into debt, because I think that goes to some of the other things that have been done here. As you said, Brad, that the total debt has risen, according to my notes, 25% in 3 years. And of the debt, the general obligation debt has gone up more than 20%, from, in round numbers, 63 million to 80 million. And then there's debt service, you know, what you pay to borrow money. And the debt service has increased 45% from fiscal year 7-8 to this coming fiscal year. So the budget for debt is $10.34 million in servicing of the debt. Karen, can you comment on some bond payments, like for the police courts building, which I think are close to $1.3 million?
1.8.
1.8.
You took it after the DDA. The DDA is paying part of it, about half a million.
Okay, tell us about that.
Okay, the bond payments, actually for this budget, the debt service is only about 1.3 million.
Right.
And what that means is next year in the general fund, there's going to be another $500,000 of debt payment that they're going to have to come up with money for.
Because the total is 1.8.
Because it's going to go up. You're now just paying interest only, and you're going to have to start paying off the principal, and then those payments are over $1.8 million. So your mortgage, you had an interest-only mortgage in the first few years while you were building your big addition, and when the addition is done, you're going to have to start paying down the principal. And you know, we have our financing plan, but and they repeatedly promised that it wouldn't mean cuts, but now we're hearing that we need just these huge cuts in police and fire.
If I remember correctly, when this building was going to be built, we were going to be saving money from what we paid for rent.
The rent never covered. The rent savings, the supposed rent savings, were only, I think, $735,000. That included operating costs. That included the utilities, the court security cost, and janitorial, and the other cost of operating the building. And that's not in the 1.8 million. That's another 550,000. So there's a huge burden on the general fund just from this debt service. The other thing that I was just stunned by, I look at the general fund for this year, and there's over $1 million for things, capital cost associated with this new building. That's supposed to be in the $47.4 million project budget. Again, they repeatedly told us that it was all there, all the costs were there, the furniture, the cameras, everything, and now they're coming back and saying, well, all didn't mean all. So now you got to pay more than $1 million. I mean, my attitude is council needs to tell Fraser, you put that back in the project budget where it belongs. If you can't afford all the goodies you want, then you take something out. And you use that over $1 million, and you give us policemen and firefighters.
And so when the mayor, I think it was last city council meeting, when he said that it was all on budget, that it was all on time, all on budget, that wasn't necessarily true?
I would call that obfuscation.
Right.
It's a kind word.
Right, because maybe the building is on budget, but the payments aren't there.
There's a building construction cost, which is about $35 million. There's a project cost that includes things like moving and furnishings and the architect fees and the testing fees and the cost of city staff to supervise it. The $47.4 million was the whole project budget, not just the building. And they're trying to confuse the public by somehow making it seem that, well, this really was never in there. And I mean, clearly you go back and you look at the estimates, and they talk about owner's cost, and they talk about what is in owner's cost, and it includes those things that they're trying now to stick in the general fund.
Right. So that kind of brings up this bucket issue, how things are in bucket. And at the one of the last caucuses, you brought out a very good point about monies, Brad, being relabeled, the money that went for Google. Do you remember that?
Oh, right.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. What brought attention to that was in the budget presentation, a council member asked about a line item, I think it was $800,000 for economic development. I had no idea what it was. It turns out that a few years ago, the general fund contributed $2 million to this other bucket, the Economic Development Fund, to help pay for parking spaces for Google, which, if it was necessary to bring Google in, it was probably a worthy investment. I'm not going to say yes or no.
Right.
But on the issue of buckets, transferring it from the general fund into the Economic Development Fund, well, now, so it's out of the general fund. Now it's in this other bucket. Now they want to spend the $700,000 that's left over in the bucket. They want to spend it on something that's not police or fire or
The police courts building.
exactly.
Right. So the reason I bring it up and what you're saying about IT and everything is that we're told that there are buckets and money can't go from one thing to another. But apparently if you just relabel it, it can go. Is that really how it works?
I think when they want to get money from one bucket to another bucket, they figure out a way. So the water fund is supposed to be restricted money, fees just to pay for the water service. $800,000 from that bucket went into the general fund last year to pay for police and fire. We talk about the $2 million, and you're getting this, a lot of controversy over whether that's an appropriate thing for the DDA parking fund to give the city general fund $2 million. But from the get-go, they gave the money that's used to plow the streets, those funds, $800,000. But somehow they can't clear the snow around the parking meters for $800,000. So again, they're if they think of it, it's perfectly okay. But if the public says, well, wait a minute, you got too much money in that bucket, take some from there and put it over where we need it for the services we care about, then it's impossible.
So let's talk now what you started to bring up before, Karen, about the DDA, the Downtown Development Authority. Seems to be moving in the direction now of a mutually beneficial agreement and giving the city $2 million. They had been giving it for 5 years. They gave $2 million every single year, and a new agreement had to be worked out. So do you think that this, assuming the agreement goes through, it hasn't been voted on or anything yet, that we'll be able to keep the police and firemen if the $2 million goes through? Will it make that big a difference? That's what I'm asking.
We probably need $3 to $4 million to save that many positions, assuming you cut, nothing else. So that's $2 million. I think that the revenue sharing number is about $1 million too low. I mean, the city is saying, oh, we don't believe what, the state has projections out there saying, we think this is what sales tax revenue we're going to get. That's where revenue sharing comes from. And under the Constitution and the current state law that's in effect, you're going to get about $9.3 million, and the city has budgeted $8.2 million. I don't think you should be laying off safety services workers based on some idea that, well, we don't think that they're going to keep their promise. Now, it's true in the past, just because of the timing, the city used a higher number and it was lower, but that was because the state legislature, there wasn't enough sales tax money to give what they had given last year for revenue sharing, and they made it up from other sources. That's not what these projections are. There's a projection just the end of March, last month, that's the $9.3 million.
Right.
And so this idea that we put in this lowball number and say, oh, we're being conservative, well, if it doesn't come in fine, then you look for some other sources, but you don't start with layoffs based on that.